What is something you saw that you weren't supposed to see? Me, along with a bunch of teens in a neighborhood, used to host foreign ESL university students for semesters so they could live with an English family and practice their English while they were studying. Well, one night I was taking out the garbage and I noticed a couple of boys hanging out along our fence. I shooed them away and went back inside. Next night, same thing. Boys hanging out along our fence. I should mention that our house was next door to a church, so it wasn't unusual for people to hang out in the parking lot, but it did bug me that they were leaning up against the fence after dark. I shooed them away again. Then, every night for the next 2 weeks, started to get curious as to why they'd scatter as soon as they saw me come outside and why they didn't go somewhere else. So one night after they ran, I went over to where they were standing and looked toward my house, right into the bedroom window where a current student from Japan was lying in her bed, facing away from the window, studying from her class. Her room was on a lower level of a split, so the view was perfect to see every detail. That night, I had my wife knock on her door and suggest that we close her curtains at night without going into detail about why she should. She took the hint, and we never saw those kids again after that. I legitimately thought it was substance-related. Story 2. Homeless lady and her children come to a parking lot to panhandle. I tell a guy not to give to them, and he calls me a schmuck and proceeds to give her a fresh Benjamin, then preaches to me about how we should support our communities. I told him to take a seat next to me. At 1 p.m. sharp, as she always has, she picked up her kid and pushes the other one in the stroller to her 2017 Lincoln Navigator. He was so mad, and I told him, "I may be a schmuck, but you're an idiot." Ooh, sick burn. Story 3. I had to have been pretty little, 5 tops, probably younger. My dad was at work and my mom was in the kitchen or something. I was supposed to be playing in my room, and I was for a while, but then I decided I would sneak into my parents' room and jump on their bed, because jumping on beds is fun and they would never know. So I successfully snuck in there, climbed on the bed, was about to jump, and had a grand time until I saw what's on their dresser, straight across from me. My goldfish bowl with my clearly goldfish that passed away floating in it. Cue screaming and crying. The goldfish bowl was normally in the living room. I'm not sure why I didn't notice it was missing that day. I wasn't in the living room much, probably by design. Apparently, when my parents woke up that morning, the goldfish was gone. Knowing I'd be upset, they decided to wait to tell me until my dad was home from work, but they couldn't leave the goldfish where I could see it. They also couldn't get rid of it because I would probably want to bury it. So they put it somewhere I wouldn't see it. Unless I snuck in their room to jump on the bed. I'd say that plan failed. Story 4. Would see this couple panhandling outside different stores around town. He would be in a wheelchair and she would push him. A couple weeks ago, I saw a familiar couple on bikes riding behind a shopping center. Recognized them as a couple, followed them for a couple minutes just to see how he would miraculously recover. Saw them pull up to a nice home on the other side of town. I'm thinking maybe he got better and they'll continue panhandling. Nah, they opened the garage, parked their bikes, casually strolled in. There was a new Chevy truck parked in the driveway. I talked to my cousin, who's a deputy, and he said really nothing can be done. Technically, it's not legal to panhandle in our city and they're not breaking any laws. That's why they always advise to donate to organizations instead. Unfortunately, it's all too common. Story 5. When I was really young and started becoming more aware, I looked up some stuff on the internet. Must have been 12 or younger, and I didn't really know what sites I was on. Just soft stuff, really. Until there was a pop-up, and it was obviously of inappropriate content. It didn't show the man, but it showed the girl. The girl was younger than me. It shook me up. It was only for a few seconds, but I realized what it was. I shut everything down, truly terrified of what I saw. I cried my eyes out all night and told my parents about it. The proxy systems in my household got a lot stronger after that. I can't remember much of what I saw, but it had a profound effect on me. I never felt more upset, scared, or disgusted. Yeah, that was a truly disgusting experience. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Story 6. An email. Saw an email from the CEO to the COO discussing my raise. It asked for my old manager's pay, which was a huge raise. I was doing her job. I should get her pay, I thought. We had nearly the same education and work experience. Seems like a simpler request. I was mistaken. The COO said no, but would get something. He emailed the CEO to discuss and suggested giving me $8K more a year to keep him pacified. It would cost more to replace him. $8K is about 3 times lower than what I asked for. The CEO, who made $70,000 a year, said, "It seems like a lot." I got $6K more a year. I left ASAP. Screw that place. 2 years later, they still have been unable to fill my old position. All the work got tossed to a few poor souls who don't get paid a dime more to do the work. I just love hearing stories about people knowing their worth. Story 7. When I was in the Marines, my battalion did some training in Saudi Arabia. While on the Saudi base, we ate at the mess hall they had. Behind the mess hall were several dumpsters and dozens of feral cats. I worked the night shift, and every night going back to the barracks, I saw one of the workers from the chow hall setting out pans of scraps for the cats. The night before we left the base, I was late getting off shift. That night, I saw the same guy out behind the mess hall, and a lot of the cats looked to be sleeping. The worker also had a sack that he kept swinging to the ground. I didn't piece it together until I heard a cat in the bag cry out. It's my assumption that the psycho is feeding the cats and gaining their trust, and that the last night we were there, he poisoned the cats. I didn't know how to respond, so I just headed back to the barracks. If we had been in the States, I probably would have gone and kicked this guy's bum, but being in Saudi, I didn't know what to do. Still feel horrible about not doing anything. Story 8. So I really overheard this conversation, but I did look during a long silent pause to see my dad actually on his knees, begging my mom to have intimacy with him. I couldn't hear what he said to her, but I did hear my mom stand her ground with, "It's my body, and it's my choice. I don't want to have intimacy, and you can't force me to." Obviously, at the time, I wasn't supposed to hear any of that convo, and even now, I'm not supposed to know that my mom was concerned because my dad was fooling with women in multiple states, and she was worried about her safety, since he'd stick his thing in whatever was available. But I do. Story 9. I swear this story is 100% true. So in 9th grade English class, our teacher assigned us to group work for the day so she could chill out and grade papers. She had a teacher's assistant who was another student at her high school. We will call him Tim. He was either a junior or senior at the time. So we're all working at our tables, and Tim comes over and starts talking with me. We were on his phone, looking at some fire 2013 memes, when a kid walks up and asks Tim a question about whatever dumb worksheet we were assigned. For whatever reason, Tim goes to help the student and leaves his phone with me. So of course, 9th grade me goes straight to his picture folder to see what's up. So what do I find? Embarrassing pictures from last year's Christmas party? No. Tim's phone was harboring much dark secrets. Inside an album very appropriately named Crap were over 300 pictures of various craps and toilets. Thick craps, small craps, chunky craps. It was all there. I just kept scrolling down, and it was all just craps. I was honestly just in shock. And as soon as Tim came back, I couldn't just pretend I didn't see. I had to know. "Dude, why do you have so many pictures of crap on your phone?" "Oh, those are all my crap. I send them to my friends as a joke sometimes. Nobody's ever seen that before." And that was it about that. Sounds like a crappy situation. I'll see myself out. I'm sorry. Story 10. A proposal for raises for myself and my team. It never happened, as all raises were to be approved by the CEO. We wound up closing shop within the year, so I suspect now that was why it was never accepted and enacted. I was able to see current wages and the proposed raise. It had gone through our boss, his boss, and HR. Once things in the office got a bit more dramatic and stressful, I shared the info with my teammates as we all knew we'd be needing new jobs soon. I think it helped them also, knowing that our direct boss wasn't just taking himself up saying that raises were just waiting on some other guy. I had proof he'd seen and confirmed these potential changes. Story 11. Was at the cinema waiting in the lobby for the screen to open with a bunch of my mates. As all 17 to 18-year-old boys do, we were joking around and having a good laugh. The conversation leads one of the guys in the group to get his phone out and prove something to us by Googling it. I can't remember what it was, but we all remember what popped up in the recent searches when he typed Teen Solo GIF. I mean, who doesn't use my favorite of all fictional military personnel, private browsing? Who searches for GIFs on Google? Still a running joke in our group 4 years down the line. Well, that's where I started. Story 12. My cousin ended it all. He had a severe substance habit for almost a decade. I walked into his room to get my Xbox controller back at about 4 a.m. He was laying on the floor. He was taking about 3 to 5 breaths a minute, then after a few minutes, while trying to find my phone to call 911, his breathing returned to normal, but he was unable to wake up. The next evening, he was finally able to get up and walk around and return to his normal self. He always claimed it was an accident and just overdid it that night, but just recently he admitted he was trying to end it. It happened back in 2010 and wasn't the only time he had ever coded. He has now been sober for years, engaged, has his own house, and 3 future stepchildren. Story 13. Oh boy. I'm not going into detail, just listing the ones that stand out. When I was 4 or 5, I saw my mom introducing some dudes to her. When I was 12, I caught a glimpse of her introducing another guy to the other end of her when I went to the bathroom late at night. When I was 20, I walked into my best friend and roommate at the time helicoptering his thing like an idiot. I had to yell at him to stop because we were supposed to be going to grab food. When I was 21, I walked in another roommate cheating on his girlfriend with one of his coworkers. That relationship ended shortly thereafter. And at numerous points in my life of working in retail, I've seen customers open a package of something, take a bite, and put it back on the shelf. You're a grade A schmuck if you do this, and I hope you get hit by a bus. Story 14. Sister-in-law breastfeeding. No one cares, but it was jarring and uncomfortable. Probably because it wasn't something that you weren't meant to see, just something you would have preferred not to see. I feel you, though. I breastfed my kid, so I'm obviously fine with it, but I hate seeing the pro-breastfeeding posts that some of my friends make on social media. They post these pictures of themselves breastfeeding where you can very clearly see the baby latched on. I guess it's to show how progressive they are, and screw you if you don't like it. Anyway, it bugs me because breastfeeding left me with an aversion to being touched that took me years to get over. Every time those pictures accost me on social media, it reminds me of that time period and I feel actual pain for a minute. I've had a few of those friends and usually remember to unhide them after a few years once they stop breastfeeding. If I see someone breastfeeding in person, I don't care because I can look away, and usually people doing it in public are covered anyway. But it can be jarring to see the stuff if you're not expecting it, in person or online. People act like you're supposed to be cool with it, and that there's something wrong with you if you're not, and that bugs me. Kinda went on a tangent there. Guess I needed to get that off my chest. Story 15. Working IT maybe 5 to 6 years ago, the company I was working for had just laid off several employees due to budget problems. I was already kind of rattled, but I kept doing my job. One of the guys in finance had a computer problem that was going to take a good chunk of time, and so he left me alone while I worked. As the progress bar loaded, I looked around the desk. There was a statement that showed what this month's monthly payout, straight out of company profits, looked like for the private owners and their 2 kids' trust funds. All of those numbers were higher than my annual pay, monthly. We had just laid off a dozen people because allegedly we didn't have any money. This was all separate from the couple of 6-figure paychecks. That flipped me off from the free market worshipping libertarian that I used to be. Story 16. The first time my parents sent me to my brother's house to babysit. He was a single dad with 3 kids and had just picked up a new job working early mornings to cover the bills. So the arrangement was that my parents came super early to get the kids during weekdays, but on Friday nights, I would get paid $20 to go spend the night on his couch to let the kids, and also my parents, sleep in and enjoy a better morning. Well, I'm a super light sleeper and my brother forgot I was there. So that's how I got woken up at 5 a.m. by the sound of banging doors and looked over the couch to see my brother Bear walking from his room to the bathroom to shower. It's been 8 years and I still shudder at the memory. It's become an unspoken agreement that we both pretend it never happened. Story 17. Right, so I've never actually told anyone about this, but this seems like a good time to relive some of the stress and anxiety this whole situation gives me. It was a text between my mom and her friend. It was about my dad. He had tested positive for HIV. They never told me or my sister about it, since they wanted to wait until the second test results came back. I spent the next few weeks terrified, knowing that my dad was likely HIV positive. Then, a few weeks later, I snuck onto my mom's phone to read her messages with her friend to see if there was an update on my dad's test results. The second test came back negative. I don't think I've ever been more relieved in my entire life. Story 18. Well, once I was looking for something in my aunt's room and opened a drawer to find all her toys. My cousins were coming up behind me to check the drawers, and I assured them it wasn't there and rushed them out of her room. Another time, I opened my friend's Google Chrome on his phone to try and Google something, and the hub was still open. We all laughed about it. He had no shame. And lastly, I was using my sister's computer when I found a journal-type thing she wrote talking about being... I panicked and showed my mom, and we helped her through it. Story 19. Caught you, Santa Claus. I'm originally from Belgium. Santa Claus is a saint here, and kids celebrate it the same way they celebrate Santa in the US. I was 8 at school on the celebration day of Santa Claus, and we were doing gym in the gym. But the gym is built right next to our classroom, and there's a high window 3 meters from the floor. Since the gym teacher was letting us play for a while, I decided to climb the ropes, and when at the max height, I looked around and noticed teachers trashing the classroom, placing gifts and putting chairs upside down, putting miniature chocolate dolls of Santa Claus on areas. Well, me not knowing any better, I told the whole classroom of 26 kids the teachers are cheating. They're planting all the gifts and chocolates, and it's not the real Santa Claus doing this. Of course, the teacher grabbed me and pulled me aside with the principal and started screaming at me, telling me I shouldn't say that to the rest of the kids. Some of them don't know yet he doesn't exist anymore. The thing was, I was confused because I didn't know he didn't exist anymore. That night, my parents explained everything to me, and my childhood was over Easter and Santa Claus. I knew it all. The next day, the teacher pulled me aside again and apologized to me to tell me she thought I knew. What? Santa Claus isn't real? Story 20. In college, I was out in the hall outside my room talking to my girlfriend, who'd later become my wife, on the phone. I was in the hall because I didn't want to wake my roommate, and it was like 11 at night. Door next to mine opens, and the guy who lives there and his girlfriend come out, both bare. He's supporting her as they walk towards the bathroom. As they pass me, she bends over and retches all over the floor. They continue walking as I tell my girlfriend to have to go. I get the pleasure of waking our RA up so he can get someone to clean up the mess outside my door. Another story, this was actually my dad, but because of this story I got to see some pretty cool things. So my dad joined the Coast Guard in the mid-70s, shortly after I was born, 1981, while living in California. He had the opportunity to tour Rockwell's facility where they built the space shuttles in Palmdale. He was part of an entourage following around an admiral. Being my dad, he brought a brand new Canon SLR camera along because, why not? When they got to the facility, there were signs all over the place that said, "No photography allowed." No one said anything to my dad. He went inside with his camera, and no one said anything. They went to the floor where the Space Shuttle Challenger was being built, and no one said anything to him. So he just took as many pictures as he could, and no one said anything to him. My dad guessed that no one wanted to confront a group that included an admiral. I haven't seen them in years, but the sides of the space shuttle being built are some of the coolest things I've ever seen. They are certainly not something I was ever supposed to see. I'd love to share these, but my dad has them. He lives a couple thousand miles away, and I don't know if he even knows where they are. I promise if I ever come across them again, I'll post them. Story 21. A few friends of mine told my ex, fairly early in our relationship, that I wasn't suited to him, that they were better suited. One was through MSN or something, which I saw because I was sitting right beside him and he was showing me. The other was on a phone call just a few years ago that he put on speakerphone. Second, the girl was intoxicated, had been talking to me earlier, pretending to be my bestest buddy, then telling him she would be a better match because she was more into computers than I was. And he's extremely brilliant with programming or whatever. Oh, the first girl. It was a mutual friend and she said she was better suited because she listened to metal more than I did. She listens to the type of metal he hates, and we first bonded over Slipknot. Whatever. Either one of them can have at him. We aren't together anymore. Though we were for years, even got married. Guess they weren't really friends of mine. Story 22. Similar to a few other stories, back in 2008 after the economy crashed, we were already kind of poor and struggling some, though slowly improving, but that crash pushed us back down a ways. I used to get a weekly allowance, but after that crash I was lucky to get anything at all. There was a parrot I really wanted at a pet store, so I did literally everything I could to save up for it. I would get lunch money for school and I pocketed that money instead of using it and just brought my own food. Anyway, I figured I could speed things up if I dug around for change, in drawers, cars, etc. You'd be amazed by how much loose change you can find in that stuff. So my parents, I knew had loose change in their drawers. You could probably already guess where this is going. I had a feeling of the possibility before I saw it. Lo and behold, a big toy, which just happened to be my mom's favorite color. Ugh. I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 23. I was doing an internship together with a college student. We were both IT students charged with developing some software. Our laptops hadn't yet arrived, so our boss, being out of the office that day, allowed us to use his computer to do some preliminary research for the project. We downloaded some documents and went to the downloads folder to copy the files to a USB stick. The view mode was set to large icons, which meant all the images inside had a nice little preview thumbnail, and some of those images, I believe, were not meant to be seen by us. There were pictures of our boss together with one of the employees, both dressed in skimpy black leather. He was wearing a pinned collar, biting down on a ball. They were being intimate. Funnily enough, they were both wearing Christmas hats as well. I didn't open the files themselves, partly because I didn't want to get discovered, but mostly just because I didn't want to know. But the thumbnails were revealing enough by themselves. The 2 months after were a bit awkward whenever we saw both of them in the same room. You wouldn't be able to tell they had a thing, but we knew. Our boss was a married man as well, which added some extra spice to this little dirty secret. Story 24. When I was 10 or so, I was part of a sports festival of some sort, and the opening ceremony involved all kinds of sportsmen who would go out on the stage and show some moves. I did karate back then. 5 or more pairs of kids aged 10 to 12 would go, throw their partner on the floor or something and go away, and then there'd be some bodybuilders flexing and so on. Things were chaotic, crowded, and disorganized backstage. I got lost in the crowd and didn't know that the locker room where we changed into our karate gi was then given to other sportsmen. I came back there and saw like 10 bodybuilding guys casually walking bare there. They didn't even turn their heads to see who opened the door and exposed them to the crowd. They were big and muscular and covered in fake tan, and their backs were so laughably itty-bitty small and absolutely pale. The contrast was so immense that I laughed out loud, and later when I found my team in the next locker room, I tried to sneak other girls to that door to witness some hilarious tiny backs of these big men. Story 25. My old boss sent me the billable hourly figures of the staff members for a project we were working on, consultants, as I had agreed to assist with some office admin and got a raise for it when I was in my early to mid-20s. Except it wasn't the billable list. He sent me an Excel file with a tab that said salaries. Naturally, I clicked on it. It listed everyone's salary in my office of 8 or 9 people. Just column A, person's name, column B, salary. I was shocked to see I was being paid slightly less than the guy near me who I was close friends with, and he did maybe double the work I did. Basically, I was way overpaid. But I saw the office manager's salary go down to me at the lowest level. He sent me an email not 2 minutes later asking for me to delete the previous file in email. And I said I hadn't opened it yet, but will do. Story 26. When I was a kid, I was forced to go to church camp by my parents. I'm not religious by any means, so making friends was a little difficult when most conversations rotated around beliefs. Anyway, during camp, we had one camp-out night where we slept in the woods. 2 male campers invited me to go hunting for Slender Man, which I thought was freaking hilarious. This was when he was crazy hyped and popular. Anyway, we snuck off into the woods, and when I got tired of them scaring themselves, I went to look for a porta potty, in which I found 2 of the camp counselors pressed up against each other. I didn't want to watch them make out and feel each other up, but I didn't want to know who they were, and I also had to whiz. Turns out it was my counselor, which is why it was so easy to sneak off, and one of the lifeguards. I snapped a branch and waited for them to separate and look busy before I came out of the woods, and they asked me what was up. Only reason I remember this specifically is because my counselor had a boyfriend who was not the lifeguard, and the lifeguard was also married. Uh-oh, I guess. Story 27. Oof, it's a shame I'm so late. I've got 2 good ones. Number 1, my mom asked me to help her move her mattress, as her and my dad were getting a new one and it was being delivered that day. I walked into her room and got into position to lift the mattress from my dad's side, while she was across from me on her own side. They both started lifting, but I stopped and I looked down. Right below her, sitting on her bed frame, were 2 massive toys. One was a huge plastic floppy-looking pink one, and the other was a hard blue one, which I'd suspect was electronic. I looked at her sadly and looked down and screamed, dropping the bed. I sat my half down and walked out of the room. She did it by herself. Number 2, my mom again. I was in her basement rummaging through all the boxes we've had down there forever since we moved to our new house when I stumbled upon some journals that were written by my mom through her late high school and college years. Absolutely atrocious and self-incriminating. My sister and I were reading through them, and whenever we found something risque, we would share. All sorts of crap about intimacy and guys, alcohol, and things of that sort. I remember one section clearly outlining how she whistled this dude and how big it was. She always told us, and still always tells us, about how innocent she was. We know better. I still feel bad about reading them, but it was definitely an eye-opener. Story 28. I went to Cincinnati, Ohio for the weekend once, and I looked down an alley and saw 4 tall men in black suits with headsets and cameras. Curious, I stopped, and they quickly ran into a nearby door. On the door was a sign that said, "Keep out." And at the time, I didn't have the guts to go in. I didn't think much of it, I just thought it was weird. But about a week later in my hometown, I kid you not, I saw the same 4 guys in the back of a white van with no license plate. This time I had my weapon on me, and I was angry and scared. I started walking towards them, and I heard one say, "Got the feed," as they closed the doors and drove off. For weeks, I was super paranoid. I thought it might be part of something similar to the Truman Show. Sounds crazy, but I was really freaked out by the whole situation. I had nightmares and crap. It still haunts me. Story 29. Me and a friend were sneaking into the garden of this girl in our class once. We were about 12 years old. She was extremely pretty, and since we knew where her room was, we just wanted a glimpse. But instead of seeing her, we saw her bigger sister. She was approximately 16 at the time, walking out of the shower in a basement window. We had the perfect angle. My friend started half shouting in excitement. I tried to shut him up, and our sounds alerted their small but really fast dogs who apparently were roaming the garden somewhere. The dogs chased us out of the garden, and we had to escape by hiding in these compost bins at the end of their street. It was worth it. Story 30. I'm probably too late to the party, but here goes anyway. When I was a kid, 3rd grade-ish, I was at an evening school event at the Catholic school I attended. I wandered out of whatever the event was and started exploring the school, checking to see if I could sneak into the principal's office or any of the other usually off-limit places. As I was exploring, I saw the light to the nurse's office was on and the door slightly ajar. I heard noises coming from the room and decided to peek in, where I was treated to the sight of Father O'Reilly and Sister Susan doing that thing that I'd learned they both took vows to not do. I returned back to the event with a very different view of holy orders. Story 31. I've had this friend ever since high school. She and I are in our 30s now. We have similar personalities and always got along through high school, college, and adulthood, regardless of different interests or friend groups or whatever. We would reconnect often and hang out maybe 3 times a year, and we'd text or phone a few more times than that. You know, those friends. You don't see each other every week, but you pick up right where you left off when you do see each other. We had plans to hang out a couple years ago. She had been canceling and rescheduling for a few weeks. Pain in the bum, but whatever. It happens. She finally didn't cancel one night, so after work I went home to change out of work clothes since I had some time to spend before meeting up. And I got some texts from her that were to someone else about me but accidentally sent to me. She was telling the person that, she has to go hang with some guy she sorta knows because she's been rescheduling for weeks and can't put it off anymore. But she'll make up some excuse to leave early so she can get out of it quickly. I just responded that must have been embarrassing for her, and she tried to save it by saying she was lying to her friend about not wanting to see me. But she definitely didn't try to hang out again after that. I haven't talked to or heard from her since. I was disappointed by that, and it still bugs me a little. Been friends for like 20 years. Close enough to where we'd sleep in the same bed during high school sleepovers, visit each other in different states during college, and crash at each other's apartments in New York City if we stayed out too late. Depending on who was closer. People, man. Story 32. Working in IT, heading into the CEO office of a small company to install a printer, he just left to let me do my thing. He left his computer open on a back page looking for specifically 18-year-old blonde girls. The kicker, right next to his computer were framed pictures of his wife and blonde daughters. I made sure to install the printer remotely via my computer. Never touched his, but made sure it was left open and unlocked and in clear view with the back page still open, just like he'd left it. Left my job about a month later. Left a note on his desk saying, "Don't be so creepy. The entire office saw your back page searches." Story 33. I played junior hockey in a small town in Western Canada, which was literally surrounded by Hutterite colonies. We nearly always played on Saturday nights, and particularly after home games, we would always see the same group of 4 to 5 of these youngish dudes, 16 to 18 in the 7-Eleven parking lot. They always wanted the same thing: beer, magazines, and smokes. They would greatly overpay one of us to procure the stuff for them, and they would proceed to consume their crap in the 7-Eleven parking lot before getting behind the wheel of their buggies and cruising off into the cold Alberta night. It was a strange situation. What was even stranger was they would always tell us about how their colony would literally pay us to anonymously impregnate their women to prevent interbreeding between the people of the colony. No one to my knowledge ever undertook the mission, but that's messed up. Story 34. Many years ago, I lived in a terrible house in a terrible part of a terrible town. It was a big 4-story house that had been poorly cut up into 3 apartments. Ours was the top 2 floors. Because it was such a hack job to turn into apartments, there was only one electrical service and it was all in the basement apartment. This apartment was occupied by a guy we called the king of all rednecks, who had a rotating cast of other roommates or boarders with him, but frequently had women with few teeth and poor hygiene that he would offer to us for $20. Never really clarified what $20 would get us, but we guessed it would be nasty and we didn't want any. At the time, we were prone to using power tools in questionably appropriate ways, and we were trying to turn an overhead ceiling fan into a belt drive to power a kinetic sculpture we were making, and my talented but now very adept friend used a corded drill to try and attach a bracket that would guide the belt around the fan body. He drilled a 3-inch long drywall screw through the fan housing into the running motor. Surprisingly, he didn't pass away. He did, however, cause a very loud and very bright explosion that in turn stopped all the power to our apartment. We played rock, paper, scissors, and I lost. So I went down the stairs, out the door, around to the basement door, and knocked on the door to the apartment that contained the breakers for our apartment. One of the king's women opened up the door wearing a long shirt or a short dress and explained what happened, so she invited me in to come throw the breakers. She led me back to the bedroom where the breakers were and looked over her shoulder and said, "Let me just clean this up for you." She bent over to pick something up to clear the way to the breakers, and her top rode up, exposing her business end that looked remarkably like a hatchet wound. As I type, I wonder if I was actually supposed to see this as a business proposition. At the time, I assumed it was accidental. Threw the breakers as quickly as I could and ran back upstairs, locking every door behind me. Hatchet wound is crazy, bro. Story 35. I was 16 years old. I wasn't thinking clearly. Me and my friends went for a fight against other people for some trouble some other friends of ours had. We agreed we'll fight each other 30-30. We went to their area and it wasn't 30. There were almost 120 people. They were running towards us. A man from our side pulled out a weapon and fired 2 of them in the legs. I didn't know him. He was familiar, but I didn't know him. And suddenly all of 120 ran away from us. I remember it like it was yesterday. Since that day, I'm a calmer man and don't do that idiotic thing anymore, just looking for my job. Story 36. Friday during college, my last class was at noon. After that, I had 4 or 5 hours of work studying depending. Anyway, my roommate leaves to go with his girlfriend every weekend to her hometown, Friday afternoon, returning on Sunday night or Monday morning. So imagine my surprise. I come into my dorm room and he's in bed, full out pie munching his girlfriend. She didn't see me or hear me somehow, but he had stopped looking up and had a look of shock in his eyes. Turns out the reason why they haven't left was she was waiting on her roommate to return from the store and was being later than normal. So they decided to do some happy fun time while waiting. I would too. Story 37. I was casually eating a sandwich before work on a very cloudy afternoon downtown. It was on a weekend and the weather was going to be bad, so most people were indoors or at home. I sat next to a window at the sandwich place and saw this extremely attractive woman in a short dress crossing the stopwalk like 20 feet away. A huge gust of wind blows and it completely lifts her dress up to her waist. Nothing on, and no one but me to witness her struggle to fight the wind and get her dress back in place. I still think it might have been a dream. Story 38. A few months ago, there was a strange-looking guy just standing behind my house. A friend of mine asked him if he was all right and if he needed anything. He looked afraid and said he was thirsty, so my friend gave him a water bottle. As they were talking, he said that he couldn't tell his name and personal stuff. When my friend asked why, he said, "It can have consequences for both of us." My friend and himself. Later that night, he appeared at my friend's house. My friend gave him his address in case he needs help, and they had a little chat. The guy told my friend that he looked like a suspect, but that he didn't do anything and that he'll be gone in a few hours. On the road to his last destination, I didn't trust all of this when my friend told me this, so I went on the internet to find out about a Belgian-bearded young man who may have gone missing, but I found out something more disturbing. I found a composition drawing of a guy that looked 90% like the guy we met. A wanted guy in Belgium who an old lady by robbing a jewelry store was still missing. I called the cops and told them the story. The only thing they said was, "You'll send a car out to look for him," but more in a standard patrol-likely thing. They didn't take it seriously at all. I never saw or heard from the guy ever again, and the wanted guy is still not found. Story 39. I went to the beach earlier this year with my girlfriend, and we were heading back to my car. As we walked through the parking lot, I looked up from my phone and saw a girl completely bare, hurriedly putting on a shirt. She saw me looking at her before I could turn away and quickly finished putting it on. I told my girlfriend about it when we got back in the car. She was on her phone and didn't see it, and strangely enough, she got upset with me. "I bet you liked it." I mean, no, it was an accident. Anyway, she held that over my head until I broke up with her. Story 40. In middle school, 12 to 14 years old-ish, I always walked with my head down. Didn't want to catch anyone's attention because 95% of the time it was bad attention. During recess, I walked into the bathroom, slipped past the three girls at the mirrors and pushed open the only bathroom stall that was cracked open. There was someone in there. She hadn't locked the door or noticed that it was starting to open because she was also looking down, because she was inserting something. I was still looking down and I saw everything. I immediately left and waited outside the bathroom for her and the three girls at the mirrors, her friends, to leave before I went back in. It's one of my most vivid memories from childhood. Story 41. Also witnessed a man cut into line at a KFC in a well-known casino. The man who was cut off asked the guy in front to get back in line and was told to shut up. What I saw next is something I will never forget. The guy in line pulled out a large weapon and harmed the queue jumper over a dozen times. People ran in every direction. Crap like this you never forget. Story 42. My permanent record. This was pretty long ago, but I had a summer job doing some maintenance work in my high school before leaving for college. And thought one day, I wonder what they have in those file cabinets in that locked storeroom. It was kind of interesting. They had aptitude test results from tests I don't even remember taking, observations teachers had made, etc. It was pretty amazing and far more in-depth than I would have suspected. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.